Hello, class. So now we're going to talk about a pop art style of painting. And when I say pop art style, I'm just speaking generally, and I'm just talking about a way of painting that's inspired by popular culture. But when I say pop art movement, then I'm referring to a specific group of artists that worked in the 1950s to 1970s. Okay, and today we're going to talk about the pop art movement and neo pop art. But here's some artists that work in a pop art style. Okay, so we're going to talk about pop art movement. This is a group of artists that worked from the 1950s to the 1970s. Here's a work by Evelyn Axel. She was a Belgian artist. And here's a work by Andy Warhol, who was an artist from the US. Okay, so the location of the pop art movement. So it largely occurred in the US and Britain, but involved other countries and cultures as well. And these other countries and cultures are starting to get more attention in the present moment. Like I said, the time period was the 1950s to the 1970s. And pop artists are known for utilizing the images and aesthetics style of popular culture. Okay, and popular culture is the culture of the masses. Okay, so this includes, the TV, the media, the print media. This includes, the products of the mass culture. Okay, these are all part of the popular culture. Here's a word called Atomic Kiss. And you can see how this utilizes the image of popular culture. Maybe this is an image that was seen on television or an image that was seen maybe in a newspaper. Okay, that was appropriated and used in this work. Okay, now the pop art movement involved a lot of different media, including painting, printmaking, and sculpture. But since it's a painting class, we're mostly going to focus on the paintings of pop art. Okay, but just to show you, other types of media that were used, here's a soft sculpture by Claes Oldenburg. Okay, it's called Soft Toilet. Okay, like I said, pop artists utilize imagery from popular culture. Okay, this could be comic books, soup cans, magazine advertisements, images from television, from movies, movie posters, and such. Okay, the Campbell soup can, including its label, is part of popular culture. And Andy Warhol used this image and made a painting from it. And this was unusual because at the time, there was a divide between low culture and high culture. So it was believed that low culture was for the masses, and high culture, which the tradition of painting was a part of, was for the educated elite. So when artists like Andy Warhol brought, what was considered low culture into what was considered high culture, then it started to blur the boundaries of what was low and what was high, and it started to question what was an appropriate subject matter for painting, and should there be this divide between low and high culture? Okay, but not only did they take imagery from popular culture, but they also were inspired by the way that popular culture depicted these images. So, for example, because Roy Lichtenstein was inspired by comic books, he also took the aesthetic style of comic books, which used Ben-Day dots, and these flat shapes with sharp edges. Okay, so if you've ever looked up close at a comic book, you'd realize all these little dots. Okay, and that's what helps to create the color that you see. So Roy Lichtenstein painted these dots in his paintings. Okay, and utilized the style of comic books, not only in the subject matter, but also in the way that these subject matter was depicted. So Andy Warhol, imitated the style of commercial advertising. So when he painted his images, he painted them as if they were product advertisements with sharp edges and flat shapes. Okay, so there's a style that was often seen in product advertisements at the time. Okay, and let's go through a couple artists. So one of them is Roy Lichtenstein, which we've already looked at. And he's an artist that utilized images in the style of comic books. Okay, here's another artist, Ed Ruscha, who's inspired by the style of commercial advertisements, as well as I would say signage. A lot of his work either is in the style of signs or depicts signs. So here's Ed Ruscha's work, Annie. And here's Ed Ruscha's painting of Norms. Okay, here's another artist. Her name is Evelyn Axel, and she worked in Belgium. And like I said, the pop art movement wasn't just in the U.S. and Britain, but also in other countries such as in Europe. Okay, and you can also see how she's using the style of commercial media with these flat shapes and sharp edges. Okay, now we're going to talk about neo-pop art. Okay, here's a work by Takashi Murakami. And anytime neo's in front of a movement, it means a new or revived form of. So when it says neo-pop art, it means a new or revived form of pop art. Okay, so neo-pop art, took aspects of pop art, but did it in the 80s and 90s. Okay, and here's a work by Keith Haring, okay, called Andy Mouse. Okay, so here's a work by Takashi Murakami, or here's works by Takashi Murakami. And when you look at these works, I want you to consider for a moment what type of popular culture, popular media, do you think it was inspired by? Okay, if you said anime, then you're right. Okay, Takashi Murakami is inspired by the popular media of anime. Okay, so a lot of his works are done in the style of anime and also feature imagery from anime. Okay, Takashi Murakami also has done collaborations with Louis Vuitton and did the album art for Kanye West's graduation album. Okay, now we're going to talk about Keith Haring. When you look at this, what type of popular media would you say that Keith Haring was inspired by? If you say cartoons, then you're right. Okay, so Keith Haring is inspired by cartoons. Here you can see these thick outlines that he uses, as well as these flat shapes. Here's another work. And if you look at this, it kind of does look like a cartoon of the 90s, the style that it's painted in. He was also inspired by street art. He was a street artist. Here's another work by Keith Haring. And here's some of the sources if you'd like to do more research on pop art.